actually the questions to which I cannot respond are the ones I like most, because they help me to learn more. So please ask me difficult questions. Good morning, everybody. 1 year ago, and you can read that in your booklet, young Christian mentioned that I say this sentence, which I don't recall, so I hope he's right. It seems I said, I don't want to be alone on this journey. And I was just announced, we are just before the official start of the footprint experience and pilot. It was a kind of a gambling at that time, because we didn't know how that was going to work and happen. Now, if you look at this picture, it seems I'm not alone at all in this journey. The response of stakeholders has been impressive. We have been overwhelmed by the number of pilots proposal, by the number of stakeholders that are registering on a daily basis to our websites. And of course, this is nice, this is interesting, this is putting some challenge on me and my staff, but is this the kind of challenge that we like? And why is that happening? Why are companies, NGOs, member states, governments from all over the world collaborating with us and contributing to this journey? The reasons are in Karen's speech. She has said everything brilliantly. They are there because there is a need. They are not there because they are fearing that the policymaker will start doing some crazy things, which we will do in any case. But they are there. This request of the footprint was coming from them, was coming exactly from the governments, was coming from industries who were knocking to our door saying, please do something, because we are getting crazy. Whenever we try to sell our products, they're asking us the same information differently. We need that harmonization of method. And they need that because they are good people and because they want to make good money out of that. And we have seen that, as Karen also was saying, consumers are starting to change their behavior. The knowledge gap is closing. And this was industries from all over the world understood, and that's why the amount of greenwashing has increased in an incredible way in the last year, at least in Europe. So we had to find a way to stop that. And as you can see on the map, it's not just about Europe. We have companies and governments from all over the world. As I said, North America, South America, Asia, Australia, everywhere. And this is really an open and comprehensive process. You will see, and you have probably heard, people who are not so much happy about what we are doing, saying many things and finding many problems in the PEF. But something that nobody can say is that we are not trying to do this in an open and transparent way. Sometimes probably we have been too open, and which of course allows then criticism. But I think this is the only possibility to really achieve something that can be of use to everybody. Those who likes us, and even those who don't like what we are doing. Now, these slides you have seen so many times. It's just it says in a different way what Karen was saying in her speech, and it says with different words what probably is in the back of your mind.
Keep in mind, not all of them have. It's the TSC members as well, so maybe sometimes you...
I have presented the same things to the TSC Summit a couple of years ago, I think. But just to remind you, proliferation is about too many labels, not transparent, not verifiable, confusing the poor lady who was there watching for her stuff. The internal market is something that we have in Europe, where basically it is in the treaty, and it says that all the products should be able to move around and to be sold at the same conditions all over Europe. And of course, if you start building different requirements in order to sell your products, depending on the country where you are, this is against the treaty, is against the European way of doing legislation. And we have seen member states, we have seen France, we have seen Italy, we have seen, to some extent, UK, and also other countries which are not part of the European Union but are in Europe, like Switzerland, they are starting to considering, or in some cases implementing legislation which has different requirements for certain products. And this is not something that at the Commission level we can accept. And then there is the issue of competitiveness. As I said, by greening your supply chain, and the example of plastics was a clear example, you not only do something good for the environment, but you do good business. You're saving 50 million, was it euro or dollars? Euros, good for the change. You're saving 50 million euros that I'm sure you will invest for further research and for further improvements. And then there are consumers. There is a kind of, I mean, it's easy to see what we are doing as something consumer-oriented. And I even saw in Karen's slide that she said one of the outcomes would be on-pack labeling, which actually we are not so much considering. But I mean, that's a different point. But what I want to say is that actually the most of the benefit of working through the hotspot analysis that TSC is bringing forward, or through the PEF and OEF, it lays in the business-to-business part, in the supply chain improvement. Yes, consumer can do certain things. They can. I personally don't think that consumer should have the whole responsibility of changing the world. Maybe retailers have, they could play a larger role compared to what they do nowadays. Choosing which products to sell, it's a hard thing to do. It's even hard to talk about that, but maybe it's something that the more environmental conscious retailer should start considering. Otherwise, there are other ways to improve the situation, which is through legislation, which is not always welcome, I know. But while Karen was speaking, I was recalling when I was younger, and we still had lead fuel, lead gasoline, which was bad. And at the beginning, it was both sold. So you could choose as a consumer to buy lead gasoline or no lead gasoline. And people were still buying lead gasoline because it was sometimes cheaper. Then what was the turning point? It was when we banned the use of lead gasoline. So not necessarily having the possibility to choose is always the best solution. We have also to think that sometimes more drastic solution can be necessary. Now, what's the purpose of the work we are doing? It's about a level playing field. So it's about finding a way so that everybody which is calculating the footprint of a product or an organization will do it in the same way. It's a way to get a bit more meat around the bone of CSR. I mean, everybody's doing CSR and corporate social responsibility report, and when we read them, not necessarily we get a lot of information out of that. I mean, it depends from company to company. In some cases, you find a lot of interesting information. In some cases, you find a lot of blah, blah. And in any case, even when they go into the quantified reporting, everybody is using its own methodology that from a policy perspective is not optimal, because it doesn't help us really to understand which are the companies that should get benefits for the work they are doing. And then, as we know, and as I keep saying, there is not black and white definition of what green is, which means that we keep talking about sustainability, we could keep talking about green products, but no one has ever defined in a quantified way what green is. And that's the old concept of the benchmarking, which is one of the most challenging concepts that we are trying to push forward in the work that we are doing. Try to identify in a cooperative way what's the threshold that can define if a product is greener or less green than the benchmark. And that's the purpose of our action. Now, this is not a mistake, it's the same slide. Just look at the title. What's the problem of our action? Why are people attacking us for what we are doing? Exactly for the same reason. Because there are people who don't want to have the same calculation rules, because then they cannot cheat anymore. Because there are people who don't want to have the same requirements for the company reporting, because they cannot cheat anymore. And there are people who don't want that we define what green means, because they cannot cheat anymore. There are other problems, but just this to say that, I mean, we have to be very careful both in being over-optimistic, as I have to be, but also in being over-pessimistic, as some people are trying to be. Now, in order to try to see if all this can work in practice, we did at the Commission something quite unusual. So we decided to launch a pilot phase. I say unusual because, I mean, sometimes for several reasons, we don't have that luxury. Sometimes we have to start with policies without having really the time to test them if they work in practice. And this is not good. This is not good because if we are lucky, it works and then everybody's happy. If we are unlucky, it doesn't work, and then we might create even more damages that we want to repair. And this is also, I want to say that because, and this was a reflection I was actually doing last night, and it came back to my mind now, again, listening to Karen. She was referring to the lasagna case with the horse meat. Too often in the past, it happened that policymakers had to take decision based on the urgency because the public opinion was expecting some action. Now, Karen also again mentioned some facts and figures about the environmental state of the world. Recently, the WWF report has been published, I think 2 days ago, and it's clear that the way we are producing all over the world is not sustainable. I mean, everybody knows that. We more or less keep doing the same thing. In some parts of the world, they are doing even worse things that we are doing. What's the point in this? Is that sooner or later, something else will happen. A major, I mean, usually how things evolve, they can evolve through a continuous improvement, and they can evolve through earthquakes, so breakthrough. On that, I'm more on the pessimistic side, I would say. I'm afraid that sooner or later we will realize that we have gone too far in our overexploitation of the world, and then people will start to get angry and ask for remedies. And then the poor policymaker will have to take a decision overnight. The risk of that is that if we will not have in our pocket at that moment in time something solid, then we might take bad decisions in order to find a solution to an existing problem. So that's why having the time and the luxury of trying things, testing things, and improving them all together maybe will not lead tomorrow to a policy, to a decision, to something that you will experience in your everyday life. But at least we will have something ready that in case we will have to take certain decisions in the future, we have a solid base on which we can build. Now we have, as I said, we were overwhelmed by proposal of pilots, and we have limited resources, so we had to choose only a few of them. And in the end, we have 27 pilots ongoing. And 27, it depends how you look, the glass half empty or half full, could be a lot or could be not enough. If you ask me, which I'm coordinating all this, is a lot, it's too much, but it's extremely interesting because as you can see on the list, we are really looking to most of the sectors which where we experience in our daily life products about. There are few sectors missing, and they are missing because they didn't want to be part of the exercise. And I mean, we have to be clear on that. Not everybody is happy about what we are doing. Some sectors are not, so they decided not to be part of the exercise. And we didn't want to oblige anybody. So if they didn't apply, that's fine with us. But we are very happy about all the sectors that applied because we are gathering a lot of knowledge and information about that. As we say, the scope, just to remind you, few and clear rules, focus on the most relevant environmental impacts, SMEs, and again, I have to quote Karen. I mean, I never quoted so many times a speaker in my life. If it doesn't work for SME, it will not work in the real world. That's something that we are very clear in mind. We are trying to have that, in the back mind of all our actions, and we think that certain decision that we are taking will make it relatively easy to be applicable also for SMEs. This is the timeline. I say that the pilot is a 3-year process. It will end in December 2016. It's quite a complex process, and it has to be complex because we are trying to tackle serious things in a serious way. And as you can see, the red dots are the consultation that we are having. I say this is a very open, transparent, and comprehensive process. I cannot remember any of our processes which has so many public consultation where really people can step in, intervene. I mean, I don't recall any process where everyone in the world can send comments and be sure that that comments will be dealt with and will be replied to. List me other processes like that. I cannot recall any. Usually there is always some filtering, or you have to be part of a certain organization to comment. Anyway, this is what we are doing. We have at least 3 consultation rounds during the development of the documents. And we have at least 2 review processes, which are done by different people, which will also ensure that what we will come out with is based on solid scientific grounds, which is extremely important. And then we have different decision points. So things can be adapted and modified during the process. And this is also something which is a luxury of a pilot. We started with certain rules and thinking, and during our journey we are changing them when we are convinced that what we were doing was wrong. And this flexibility is again something that I think there is a lot of value in that. Now, I want to try to continue my speech giving you an insight on the past challenges, the current challenges, and the future challenges. Now, the largest past challenges that we had was to start the machine running. I mean, we had a beautiful car, we had half tank of fuel because there was crisis, so the tank was half full, half empty, but we had to start the engine. And as this is a very complex process, it needs a complex governance behind, which is really important for the credibility of the process itself. So this is the complex machine that we have behind, and we had to start the machine running. So what I tried to do while preparing this presentation was to try to make a self-evaluation of what we have done. So the mark that you will see them, from 1 to 10, 10 is best. This is the system I was used to when I was a kid. It's what I think about that. Of course, if you ask whoever else, you will get different mark, but at least this is my insight in what we have been doing. A part of the governance is the steering committee, where all the member states, industry are sitting, and NGOs, where we are discussing the more political issues around this pilot. And I think there we have done a pretty good job. I mean, it's an impressive body. When everybody's there, we are around 100 people. So it's difficult to steer a process with 100 people sitting there asking the floor and commenting. But I think in that we have been quite effective. So all the meetings that we had 4 or 5 until now, we are meeting on every 2 months, have been pretty good, and I think people are happy of being there and contributing. Then we set up what we call the Technical Advisory Board, which is the group of the LCA expert, which should help us in taking technical decision. This Technical Advisory Board is chaired by me, and the mark for that is 2. We are doing really bad, and that's my fault, I have to admit. I haven't been able yet to to group the people around the table to discuss things, because I'm a bad planner of my time, so that hasn't worked yet. Now we are trying to see how we can improve that, because that it is extremely important that beside the policy making thinking, we have a solid technical thinking behind. And there are so many issues when you deal with this pilot on a technical level, how to ensure consistency, how to model electricity mix and things like that, that you really need the help of experts. So there's something where we definitely have to improve in this second year of work. Then we have the help desk, which is a team of consultants who are helping the piloters. I think there we are doing reasonably well. It's not an easy job for them. We have probably 3 of the best consultants in Europe and around the world. And one of them is PRE, which is also sponsoring this event. There is room for improvement, as always, but I think they are doing a pretty good job. And then the involvement of stakeholders in the governance has been good, but can be improved. I mean, when we design the governance, we try to be as comprehensive as possible. So we had the policymakers, we had the industry, and then we try to involve all the other part of the society, so SME representation, NGOs, consumers, and others. Some of them told us that they could not follow the process because the process is too complex, because they don't have enough resources, which of course is a pity, but I mean, again, we cannot oblige them. So for the time being, the NGOs are a bit lacking. The Small Medium Enterprise Association at the European level is trying to follow as much as they can, but they are not as present as we would have liked. So there we have to try to compensate somehow, but it's something that can be improved and shall be improved in future. And then I've said we have this consultation process, which is working pretty well for such a big pilot phase. In terms of transparency, I didn't give 10 just because we can always improve, but it's 9.9, if I could say that. I mean, we cannot be more transparent than that. Really, we are publishing all the documents. We are providing all access to information. Whoever is asking to contribute, they can. So, really,
you need a cutoff criteria here.
As you know, in the PEF method, we cannot have cutoff, and the screen says yes. But anyway, transparency is really great. The quality of results is good. It could have been better, but I think when you look at the complexity of the exercise, what we are getting for the time being, and for the time being we are still at the definition of the representative product, and the scope is pretty good. And then the communication information on our side, so the communication that we are doing to the external world, I think we are doing a good job. There was the need to be present to explain what we are doing, because even if through the website we are trying to be as clear as possible, it's easy to misunderstand what we are doing. It's easy for people to send wrong information if they so want. So there was no need for us to be there and say exactly and explain what we are doing, because after we explain, then things become more clear, and then also the support that we receive increase. This doesn't mean that we don't want criticism. We welcome constructive criticism. I mean, it's nice to hear when people come to tell you, oh, you're so good, you're doing such a great job. I mean, my ego is really happy about that, but I'm not learning anything new. So I like the constructive criticism when I receive an email from you and saying, I like what you want to do on communication, but please be aware of this, and that problem that you will face. That is the kind of message I like, because it's telling me where I have to be aware, and it is also suggesting a solution to that. So constructive criticism is welcome. Criticize just for the sake of criticize is not. I mean, I'm hearing also to that, but that's not really what I need. And I invite everybody to think why people are criticizing if there is a hidden agenda behind. Now, which are the current challenges? We have the challenge of horizontal consistency. As Karen says, supply chains are complex, they go beyond Europe, so whenever you start developing category rules, you need to be sure that whatever decision you take has to be consistent with the decision that someone else will be taking somewhere else when the two supply chains, they cross each other. And we will have to ensure this horizontal consistency at PEFCR level, because after it will be much more difficult to reconcile them. An example of that is what we call the cow model working group. Now, for those of you who are not aware of that, we have 5 pilots which have something in common, and I've seen Luca Capodieci. He's there, he's one of the cowboys. So basically they are all using, at certain moment in time, this little cow, either for producing milk, for producing meat, for the leather, for pet food, or because they are feeding the cow. Now, all of you has done LCA, you know what allocation means, and you know that the big fight around the cow is about how allocating the inputs of the cow, CO2 or others. Now, we know, we need, in order to ensure the horizontal consistency, that the allocation rules for the cow will be the same for all the 5 pilots, and even the other pilots that that might come at a later stage. So instead of leaving the cowboys to work in their own offices and then come out with a solution, we set up a virtual ranch where we invited all the cowboys and cowgirls and say, okay, now we agree on the allocation beforehand, and then you will implement the model. And that will make your life easier. And this was the carrot. Then, of course, as we are the commission, we also had a stick just behind our shoulders, and then we said, we give you a time frame to find this alignment. If you don't find it, we will push for the model that we are developing in the meantime. So that was enough for them to start eating the carrot. So now they are working very well, and I'm quite confident they will come out with a single cow allocation system. Then we have another challenge, is this screening report. I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with the process, when you start developing the rules, basically you do something very similar to the hotspot analysis for TSC when you come out with, okay, where is the materiality of my product? Where really makes sense for me to look into data and into other information? This is the kind of information that the screening reports will provide us with. Now we are at the time where the pilots are starting to deliver the screening reports, and we have to make our own review of those before going to consultation. So this is a challenge because, again, we have to ensure the horizontal consistency and things like that. One of the other challenges that we have is what we call the end-of-life formula, which is, again, something quite new to the world of the LCA method. I'm not aware of any other method before that tried to push a single approach. I see Rana nodding. That means you are aware? No. Yeah, there was something. Okay. What we are trying to do basically is saying we cannot allow the war of materials. What means? Different materials have their own specific approaches, because the 100-0, the 0-100 or others, because the way you calculate, you can basically make your profile better or worse, which is, again, something I understand in terms of communication. It's not something I can accept in terms of policy making. So what we are trying to push forward is the idea of finding a single way of modeling the end of life, the recycling recovery part of it, which could be horizontally applicable to all materials and to all products. It's much easier to be said than to be done. And we are experiencing a lot of resistance from many sectors in this approach. In order to try to advance on that, we have decided to organize a workshop. It will be next Monday in Brussels. You can find information in the link beside. I think there are still few places available if you want to come. Just send us an email to register. We will defend this idea of a single formula till the very end, because we think it is possible, and we think it's probably the only or the best solution to address certain issues. If at the end of the pilot we will have solid knowledge that this doesn't work, as for all the other issues of the pilot, then we will change our mind. And again, this is the benefits of having a pilot. We can change our mind. We can improve it. Then another challenge that we are facing is how to define the significancy threshold. Karen was saying we need to focus on what really matters. But what really matters? One of the rules that people are using is the famous 80-20. So they say we look to the impacts that add up to 80, and all the rest we can simply not look at. It could be a good approach. We are still waiting for GRC to come out with a paper that will tell us how to define the significancy threshold. It could be the 80-20, I don't know. Rana keep laughing at me when I say that instead of giving me the paper, but I mean, sooner or later we will see that paper and we will see how to define the threshold. But that it is important that we define a consistent approach to identify what is relevant and what is not relevant. We are also having some challenges in identifying the independent reviewers. What is this independent reviewer? Basically, consistent with the transparency approach, we said at the end of the pilot, we want someone else, someone who hasn't been involved in the pilot, to take a look at it process-wise and content-wise and tell us what we have done good, what we have done wrong, and how we can use our results. So basically, we are trying to identify 3-4 reviewers coming from all over the world that will do this independent review of the pilot. And it's not easy to find these people. because at the same time they have to be highly qualified, they have to be not involved in the pilot, and if you remind the map from over and the number of companies is extremely difficult. And they also have to be ready to work and not becoming rich out of that, because the budget is not impressive. So the idea was to identify someone coming from industry, someone coming from academia, someone coming from public government or international organizations, someone coming from NGOs. Some of these categories we are confident that we'll be able to find the right person. In some other cases, it's going to be quite challenging. So we have to see how to solve that. We will discuss this also in the steering committee that we have next week, Tuesday, 7th October in Brussels. And then there is the big issue of data. And again, I have to quote Karen on that. The secondary data sets for LCAs, but you know what they are. And basically, this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have to face. Now, when we talk about data, there is the chicken and egg issue to be addressed. We all know that we need data. But do we need the data being there before we start writing a policy, or do we need to write a policy that we then drive data production? I have my personal opinion, probably it's not interesting to you, but in the past we have seen that people who did not want to advance in things were claiming that we don't have the perfect method, we don't have enough data, so simply we have to wait and see. And in some cases, we simply said, we don't have the time to wait and see, we will come out with policy, and then immediately after, data started to appear from everywhere. So maybe sometimes a policy is needed to drive data production. But again, secondary data sets is a challenge in LCA. Now, I try to identify 3 of the challenges and how we are trying to address them. We need high-quality secondary data sets. Because, data are available, they are commercial databases, they are public databases, but we just don't need data for the sake of having data. We need data which makes sense, which are good and can be used, and we can confidently use them without being brought to court every 2 days. So what's the problem? The problem is that most databases do not rate the quality of their data sets. So it's impossible to have a full understanding of how good a data set is unless you're really an expert in that sectors. But again, then you have to simply rely on expert judgment, which is not exactly what an harmonized procedure would dream about. What's the solution that we are trying to push forward? Well, we came out with a quality rating system for data. It's quite complex. It's for the time being not implementable because none of the database are using it. The good thing about that, which reminds me about the data production slide, is that as soon as we came out with this data quality system, and as soon as database developers understood that we were serious about that, well, they started to consider changing the database in order to align with what we are doing. And we have seen the 2 major databases that are, in one case, I think they are already doing it. In the other case, they confirmed 2 weeks ago that they are very serious about changing their internal rating system. So this might not be a challenge anymore in the short term. A second challenge, the secondary data shall be the same if comparison is an objective. Having a PCR is not sufficient to make comparison. You all know it's written in the ISO standards, it's written everywhere. One of the problem is that I can have the same rules, but if I'm using different data sets, simply the things will be different just because of that, not because the products are different. So what's the problem? For me as a policymaker, the problem is I cannot write a document, a policy, and then say to the people, okay, now go and buy whatever data set because you have to implement this policy. We are not allowed to do that. So if in future we will have any kind of policy, being it voluntary, being it mandatory, doesn't matter, we have to provide the data sets for free. They have to be free to the final user. What's the solution? The solution is that, as you will see when the final PFCR or FSR will be available, you will have there the list of the data sets you can use, probably through an hyperlink, and you will have access for free to them, which of course reduce flexibility, because then you cannot choose anymore which datasets I want to use for my electricity production mix or whatever, but you will have to use the single one that we will prescribe. That is going to dramatically reduce cost to people. It's going to dramatically increase reproducibility of the results and consistency of the results, and it will be a key step in improving the comparability of the information. The third challenge related to datasets is that the dataset shall be as disaggregated as possible. And TSC knows very well that if you want to have an hotspot analysis that makes sense, you need to really understand where the problems are. And if you have a black box in front of you, you will never understand. You will see that there is a problem, but you are blind. You don't know where the problem is. What's the problem with that is that several databases are black boxes. They are not disaggregated. We are guilty as well. If you go in the ELCD database that we have been developing, in some cases there are black boxes there. One of the largest commercial databases, I've been told, is kind of black box structured. Another one is not. Do we have a solution there? No, we don't yet. But we are actively talking to people in order to push for a solution to that. And what, for example, I'm trying to convince industrial associations who are producing databases is that maybe there is a compromise there. I mean, they have all the information. They have the disaggregated information. They simply don't release it as such, sometimes because there are real confidentiality issues behind, sometimes just because, let's say, they are not so much keen in comparing information. So what the compromise that we are trying to push on our side is to tell to this association, look, you make your contribution analysis, and if you realize that in some cases there are processes which are contributing more than others within your black box, then maybe we can find the right condition to release those as a unit process inventory instead of the black box. And it seems that some associations started to understand that there is really an issue and that the pressure on them will increase, and so they are starting to consider this option. If we manage to get that way, then I'm sure that also the databases will align, and we will be able to solve also this problem, which are very quickly the future challenges, because I think I'm eating up my time. The timing of the meetings. In the first slide, you saw that in 3 years, we counted more or less we will have 1,100 meetings, which makes 3 meetings a day. And that is not enough. That's the problem. We are realizing that we need even more meetings. And this is, for example, true for the steering committee, where decisions are made, and we will have to increase the number of meetings of the steering committee. Then we have the challenge. We will have the challenge of reconciling with the other initiatives. I'm not worried about TSC. We are already perfectly doing there. I think that was something that people were not expecting, that TSC and the Commission was going to work so well together. They were disappointed about that. But we are doing very well also with other initiatives like the Sustainable Upper Coalition. We are also working very well with them. Then, of course, there is the point of how you're going to deal with existing policies, which are life cycle thinking or life cycle assessment based at European level, like the eco-design, GPP, eco-label, and just to mention a few. And then there is the whole issue of the ISO Type 1 label. So there are a number of things where we will have to sit with colleagues and see how we can be internally consistent also among our policies. Another future challenge will be the final consistency among pilots, which is not given for granted. Again, we will see how we can deal with that. The steering committee, the technical advisory board will have a lot of fun with that, but I think we can make it. And then there is the international dialogue ongoing. This international dialogue is key. We have, in 2012, invited governments from OECD and non-OECD countries to Brussels to start discussing how we are using LCA in policy making and how we can improve that. And all the major players were on the table. So if you think about big countries, they were all sitting there. If you think about BRIC countries, they were sitting there. And also developing countries which have already LCA in policy making. We are sitting there. And since the first meeting in Brussels, we decided to meet every 6 months, so we already had 3 or 4 meetings around the world. And the atmosphere there is really getting better and better. The conversation is not about harmonization of policies, because I mean, we have the right to do the policies that we think are more fitting for purpose. The idea there is really how we can have a consistent set of tools that our policies can use. So the first issue that we are addressing is the interoperability of databases. So that's the working item on which we are developing. It is important to keep this international dialogue on, because as again, and I think this will be the last time I mention Karen, as Karen said in her speech, we are doing things in Europe, but we are not doing things for Europe, in the sense that the PEF and the OEF are Europe market-based. What does that mean? That it doesn't mean where the production takes place. It means where the product is sold that will be affected by the PEF tool. And we know that most of the products are not produced in Europe. So it is important to keep this dialogue ongoing with the other countries, because not only they will have to help their companies to fulfill the requirements that we might set up in future. And for example, I noticed that is already ongoing in the United States, where I've heard that some federal some states are funding companies based there to implement the PEF policies. But I know it's also happening in China and somewhere else. For example, it was nice to see that 2 months after the adoption of the methods, we got a formal request from the Chinese government to translate them. And then sometimes later we got official invitation from the car industry in China to go there, because they want to implement the PEF OEF in the automotive sector, which was not the case in Europe, unfortunately. So I mean, things are ongoing, and we know that they are taking similar routes in their own countries. But then there is also the important element of the international trade. I mean, whatever we do, WTO is watching us. They already invited a couple of times to explain what we are doing. Of course, it will depend on which kind of decision we take, but we already know that there are all the elements to go ahead, and there shouldn't be any kind of problem with WTO. I will not talk too much about the verification. The communication is going to be quite important. And again, so I was lying. I'm going to quote again Karen in her speech. People are changing behavior. We will base our communication stage a lot on behavioral science and behavioral insights. We have again the luxury of having GS1 on our side, so they will help testing new things and new approaches when it comes to communication. And as I said, on-pack labeling is not really something we are pushing so much. We think that we can become much more creative, much more effective in the way we communicate without going on with labeling on packs. It's part of the by-product decision. Maybe sometimes it makes sense to have that information on packs, sometimes not. We will be testing different kind of metrics. We will have brick-and-mortar shops, web shops, online experiment, focus groups. And we will also try to address other questions that you can see here, related to behavior and what really triggers decision-making in people. And the other feature is that we will not impose to anyone the vehicle, the communication vehicle. We will ask industry how you want to communicate. What do you think works best for meat or for dairy products or IT products? And they will choose the methods they want us to test with them. We have done some work in the past. We have published reports in 2011 on that. So we know already when we talk about labeling and things like that, what works, what doesn't work. Ewan has been working for the Carbon Trust, so you know that numbers not necessarily work that well on labels. Maybe people like more things like climate, water, soil, so things that they can link more to their experience. And we know that, for example, they like the aggregated information They like performance classes and things like that. So we will try to implement them as much as possible. And this is my last slide, I promise. What will happen after? What will happen after the pilot? After the pilot, we will start discussing internally. We will see the reports from the independent reviewers, and then we will sit down and see, okay, we have certain policy in Europe. How can we make good use of the information of the pilot in the existing policies? And then we will ask ourselves, do we need a new policy? Do we need a different way of tackling reporting for companies, product information, and incentives, and things like that? And then the policy discussion will start. And then again, we will start with consulting stakeholders, people, governments. So this is to say that the pilot is important. No decision is going to be taken before the end of the pilot. All the discussion decision will start 2017. And knowing how fast we are in decision making in Brussels, you wouldn't expect anything there before 2020, probably. So I thank you very much for your attention. I'm here to address all your difficult questions. I will not reply to the easy one. Thank you very much.